Okay, we're looking at Monmouth. Yeah, I got a weird situation in life right now. I gotta say one thing. Paper maps, bigger S&P maps. This one's beginning to rip. A couple of my old ones were ripping even when I got them first, or within the first couple of years. If they were stored in boxes, I'm sure they wouldn't. But yeah, then after nearly 40 years, carrying them around in various, in folders and various things where they're all kind of stuffed together and everything, and unfolding, back folding, stuff like that. All of that, yeah, it's taken its wear on them. So, if you plan on keeping a game more than half a century and playing it regularly, you may want to aim for heavier, like mounted maps, assuming you can deal with the warping, or some kind of better storage solution than I've got. All in all, though, for something that I paid probably, I guess, about $250 for, most of them have done a pretty good job of holding up. Better than some of my mounted maps and boxed games. Those big flat box games that Avalon Hill made, they saw, hey, why don't we talk about this game instead of just like my random tangent? Well, because I kind of don't want to. It's a serviceable game. I have some fun with it, especially the first half of the game before there's too many pieces on the board. The problem is, this is a design that's really, really cumbersome and mechanically fiddly, tedious, however you want to put it. I don't know if the Napoleonic ones are as disturbing. My memory is that they're worse, but they also have more complexity to them in terms of the rules overhead. What's going on here? Well, one nice thing is they've gotten rid of the reciprocal fire phases. It's pointed out to me. Those aren't embedded between the turns anymore, but are actually in each player turn. And that works out okay because there's less damage done by fire. The old Wellington's Victory Day versus Wellington did casualties when you rolled on the fire table. This just gives you basically morale effects, which could cause unit disorganization to the extent where casualties are actually happening. I think that actually works better because you got this pushing, but the problem is that adds to some of the feeling that the whole game is sort of this contest between ineffectuals. Which in some ways, I mean, it's not like the British Army. The British Army was very professional, but the ranges at which fire was conducted were far enough in general that you didn't have a lot of casualties. So the way warfare was conducted in this period, it was largely to kind of disintegrate the enemy unit. And a lot of, pushing goes on, I guess. I don't know. It certainly shows up that way in the GMT battles of the American Revolution too, where units are pushing each other more. They're not really getting a lot of casualties on each other. I'm not sure that's as applicable in the European theater, where the armies were better drilled on both sides, not necessarily better than the Brits, but where they were better drilled on both sides as a whole, so that there was a willingness to engage everywhere. Now, the Brits have a certain advantage in this game towards pushing forward, but once they start taking some casualties, and once their army starts becoming disorganized, it becomes harder, as it should, and it starts to become a real problem to get much momentum in terms of punching your way through the colonial lines. Now, the colonial troops get worse too, but we don't want to talk about that because there's weird things going on. The advance guard is like their best troops, which are about equivalent to the worst of the loyalists. I actually think they are loyalists that have that low 4-point rating as opposed to the actual British regulars and the mercenaries. Although I'm not sure, there's one unit of 4s that I think is regulars. But anyway, the advance guard takes enough hits, and it's doing pretty poorly, and then you start getting some real garbage in as the colonials, like just stuff that can barely stand in the line, even if you're not shooting at it. Anyway, what is going on here? So you have a command and control, which is a little more detailed than in most systems, because you have this concept of activation where troops can kind of maneuver and operate and be in command, but they're not ready to launch an attack. And it's kind of a nice compromise. It allows you to limit the number of the ability of like a whole army to push forward at once, etc. That probably makes sense. If you wanted to translate this to other battles, there would probably be battles where you'd have to have special rules, or else commanders who could command the whole line, between them. But I don't think that really captures the reality either. I think that there'd just be sort of, you could pre-prepare and just launch everything at once, basically. But that wouldn't really necessarily make sense for this battle at all. Wow, I totally screwed up. So I was always doing the rally phase for the player whose turn it was, and I mentioned this in the introduction. It's for the non-phasing player, which means what? It means essentially you have the rally phase where it is in all the other games that have come, since this, kind of at the end of the turn, not quite, but by putting it where it is, and by being in defiance of traditions that probably came not after this game, but after Wellington's victory, or started at the same time, I ended up just completely doing it wrong and rallying troops before they moved. I don't know how much effect that really is, except that my defenses were a little too flimsy, I think defense was a little tougher, and that probably, again, hurt the colonials. I kept cheating in favor of the Brits, it seems. You have a march phase, but then you have this reciprocal fire phase where both sides, and this is what's kind of cute about the whole thing, both sides are shooting at each other, and you're going up and down the line. The problem is it's supposed to represent sort of simultaneous fire. The problem is there's ways of gaming it to get certain little advantages that don't really correspond to anything in reality. And then there's also a huge mechanical overhead, because you have to track, as you're going alternately, which unit each side has fired last. And there's also the possibility that the line could be disrupted or something, and you have to make up little decisions as to, this part of the line is up here, we're going to jump here, and then we jump back over here, and stuff like that. There's no easy mechanism to allow it to be played easily. And you do that first with artillery, then with fire, then with infantry. Why does artillery get to fire first? I'm not too bothered by it, but again, you'd think that fire's all going simultaneously. I don't know. And then you get to a shock combat phase, which here's where I kind of screwed up, because there's a lot of opportunity fire in this game, and more than in other systems that I'm more used to. Just to say, if I'm charging into your hex, Okay, I march up to you. We get our reciprocal fire. We both fired. That's the offensive and defensive fire that I'm used to in other games. Now, even though I'm charging you, you get another shot at me as I come in to stop. And with all the units that have me in their minimum fire zone. Uh, and also artillery has a larger minimum fire zone, so it can pretty much stop any attack in its tracks. Again, I screwed some of these things up, and it probably, again, favored the Brits. And the Brits lost by a lot. They lost with a decisive loss, so which they almost always seem to. The game adds an interesting concept because of the heat of turns that are skipped. I don't think they actually do what they probably should do. Somebody brought up, there were more deaths due to heat exhaustion during this battle than there were due to gunshot wounds and bayonets. Well, what these fatigue turns do is everybody just stops fighting. Okay, that makes sense. And units get to reorganize during them. But there's no real functionality here that's causing, soldiers to just drop. The low morales, maybe of the colonials make sense, but, the Brits were. Anyway, unfortunately, the rulebook has a couple of issues I really dislike with it. It's got this bold typeface stuff that SPI started using towards the end for their simpler games. I don't think it belongs in any of them, to tell you the truth. I don't think it belongs in this one at all. But this was right in a period where I don't know if TSR had any involvement at all. They got none of the credits here that I see. So it may have been a decision that SPI was moving towards this format of roles, and the fact that they didn't survive keeps them higher in my esteem for rule writing. What does it do? Well, it distracts me, and it also they have less references into other case numbers in it than I'm used to. Maybe because the typeface takes up a little bit more space with the bold type. And what it ends up being to me is I can read a little bit of that bold type, and that's it, because it just distracts me from everything else. They also put some rules in stupid places, like in the introductory scenario that has some of the key rules for the game, and not under the places where you would expect it, because they decided things like rally would be part, and command would be part of the more complex game that they don't allow you to play with that one scenario. But instead of setting some rules and then advanced rules that add to them or something like that, they had the main rule sections after that initial scenario. No reference, no case reference, no rules description, nothing about what the other thing was. They just tell you, look in the basic scenario. And in some cases, that's exactly where it is. In some cases, it's squirreled away in other roles where it's kind of poorly handled. That would be Bob Ryer's fault. He's the rules editor. So I should complain to him, whoever he is. Map is pretty. This is late era SPI. The counters are pretty and functional. There aren't enough. Notably, what there aren't enough of is there aren't enough markers, and that's a problem that tends to happen with these magazine games. By this point, they were giving you 250-something counters in each game, and how much can you get for 250, right? They were giving you a lot of game, but not quite the components to fit it. And that's fine, if you were an S&T subscriber, it means you probably have other counters around you can use. And if you're not, well, what are you doing buying S&Ts? SPI was largely in existence for people who already knew what war games were, knew what they were doing. Anyway, I had to close this up. I've played 2 games in this series, this and Ney versus Wellington. I picked up Wellington's victory because I didn't have a good battle for a good game system to handle Waterloo. That felt like a massive hole in my collection. Well, I've gotten one now, and I'm not really sure how thrilled I am with the idea of playing this system over something like that. We'll give Ney versus Wellington a try, although I've been told the system doesn't really belong with Ney versus Wellington because the firing system as designed for Wellington's victory is really designed for a battle along a ridge that's fairly static, and Ney versus Wellington isn't fairly static. Will it matter? I don't know. But I also remember being really unhappy with how they handled, with the amount of complexity that they put into the cav charges. Physical complexity, it's not just the firepower going down the line that's problematic. The fact that counters face vertices and that enfilade fire is very easy to get, and that you have to pay movement points for each vertex of facing change and all that. That starts to get to a point where, one, it's too easy to get enfilade fire, which becomes, at least when I play too much of this game, it feels kind of like when I used to play TSS all wrong and I had headquarters units flying around behind the enemy to set up so that they could, and they can actually do this, to set up so they could fire on the enemy. They can't do offensive fire that way, but yeah, they can get opportunity fire that way, and it's still really, really vile. And they were like little motorcycle troops. But I also misplayed the artillery, so they were like tanks, but that's a different story. But yeah, it just feels way too chaotic in terms of you're always, if one person decides to plow into the other person's flank, then they've pretty much exposed their flank, and the whole game becomes slamming into each other's flank here, there, and everywhere, because the holes will appear in the line. You take advantage of them, and you're throwing yourself at risk. But you might break the other guy's whole line. You might get really lucky, or at least a big chunk of his line. And if you hit it in multiple places, you might break the whole line. So it seems kind of appealing, and it's especially a good trade-off for the colonials who are like, well, I get 2 points per Brit that I kill, and they only get 1 per my strength point, so let's kill some guys. But the other thing with it is, it's fiddly, counting, you know, oh, I've got to turn this way and move, turn. It just, you know, that steps in with the Labatt games, with the Battles of the Age of Reason. It's painful to deal with. Maybe it makes sense here. Maybe, I'm very inclined to think that it makes sense in the linear combat of Frederick, or prior to him with Marlborough. I have a lot more, well, the paying to shift facing. I don't think anything really makes too much sense with exposing the flanks like that. Not if it's an attractive option, okay? If it's the penalty that you pay for closing with the enemy, if that's how it's seen, then that's something different, and that would prevent the all-out charges that come in the Napoleonic era. But that's really only plausible as an idea for a brief period of time, and even then, not generally applicable. Just there was more of a tendency not to launch an all-out charge at that point. Anyway, like I say, I mean, it's serviceable. I can enjoy it somewhat, but I would much prefer a system that was a little easier to actually physically play. It's not like the rules are complicated for this one. When you get to the Ney versus Wellington, the cav rules, the skirmishers, those things start adding a few layers of complexity to it, and they're needed. You know, I would say that system is less complicated than the NBS, but way more fiddly than the NBS system. So, and more than Viva Lemper, which those are kind of my go-tos at this point for Napoleonics. I haven't seen anything that matches them. For Revolutionary, I don't know. The GMT ones, they're a little bit too high a level for my taste, but if I have to get down, if it's a choice between that and getting down to the detail that seems inaccurate in this at times, I think I would rather go with, the more abstracted game that feels a little more believable and a little less silly. It may just be me, but I just don't see units charging into each other's flanks all the time. All right, let's send it out.